podcast about missions where we talk about going where God is at work. I'm your host, Jesse, missions leader, here with Jen, our missiologist, and Alessandro, our church planter. Excited to talk to you about missions and what God is doing around the world. All right. Welcome, guys. How are you doing today?
Jesse, hi,
We are
Alessandro.
okay. Hello, everyone.
Getting into our first episode, I guess technically our second if you count the pilot as the first. It's kind of like that thing, I don't know if you guys saw in Europe or have experienced in Europe where the first floor is not counted. It's the ground floor, but then like back in the States, we would count that as the first floor. I feel like that's how it is with pilot episodes and stuff.
Yep, totally.
Yeah, that always, even now, still confuses me.
Yeah, in fact, I always just give the number and hope that from the number you can figure out like 6. We're on 6, whatever that is. No, cool. Well, I wanted to kick us off on this episode and just kind of ask, what's something when you travel that you do not leave without? Like for as missionaries, as global workers, we're moving around, going either back and forth to our passport countries or, in Europe, it's easy to hop around to different countries around Europe. I don't know. Does someone want to kick us off with something that, like, when you're packing your luggage, that's like one thing you do not forget?
So I've kind of gotten into this AeroPress coffee. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but it's a way of brewing like super good coffee that just requires a hot pot and then, ground coffee and so it's this mechanism that doesn't require any electricity, so I don't have to worry about what plug it's in. Most hotel rooms have a hot pot.
Yeah.
And I have to take my ground coffee. But if I do that, I can have guaranteed good coffee any time of day, whatever time zone I'm in any hotel room. So my AeroPress is fast becoming one of my favorite things. And I actually have it, like they make a travel version that has its own little case that slips into your suitcase. I have one that I have at home, but then I have my travel AeroPress coffee maker.
And what kind of coffee? What's your preferred coffee?
I really like South American coffees. I'm a big fan of Colombian, especially, and Guatemalan. But yeah,
I asked that question. I wish I knew what that meant.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've heard of that, but I find it interesting because in my case, I like when it comes to coffee. I love coffee. I drink it every morning and the afternoon. But I like when I go to a different country, I kind of just want to try whatever they have, and so that includes the coffee. Sometimes it's not the best thing, but nevertheless, it's what I go for. So in my case, I don't even think about what to bring. I guess I'm blessed to have a wife who does the packing for me. So I always thought it was funny when comedians kind of like joke about the fact that they ask you, have you packed your own case? And now I'm like, no, I haven't. I really don't pack my own suitcase. But the thing that I always think about, and this is a combined force between me and my wife, um, it's not what we bring, is what we bring back. So I always have a empty luggage, especially going back to the States. And I do like a trip to Walmart or to Costco and just fill up on things that I can't find here in Italy. Or if I do, they're super expensive. And so that's my mentality, to always have like bring little so then I can bring back a lot from home. So that's my thing.
You bring an empty suitcase. That's what you bring.
Pretty much an empty. So sometimes one suitcase within the other. So like I'll have, so I don't have to, like, I could check in my little suitcase because it's inside it, and then when I come back, I'm actually having 2 suitcases.
It's like those Russian dolls, you just keep opening.
Yeah, pretty much. And I do this all the time, especially when I'm going to the States.
That's so funny. I think I've been here too long because people, when they come from the States now, often ask, what can we bring you that you miss? And I'm like, can't think of a darn thing.
You figured out all the ways around.
I just do my life here now. I don't even think about stuff. Although I will say I was just there. Peanut butter M&Ms. I definitely cannot find peanut butter M&Ms in France, and just came back with a big bag of peanut butter M&Ms.
Oh, yeah, nice. We can't find mac and cheese here, so I always bring the cheese. That's one of the things I always bring.
The land of pasta, you can't find mac and cheese.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, I don't bring the pasta. I just buy the cheese.
No, I got you. Yeah, for me, it's my noise canceling headphones. Doesn't matter where I'm traveling to. but I always have my noise canceling headphones. And one flight, I forgot them, and oh man, I was like, how did I ever fly before? Because it takes out the humming of the engines. It's such a different experience flying with noise canceling headphones. So that's
Agree.
my go to. There's other things, but we should probably move on and talk about like missions and stuff. So last episode we had some feedback. We had a couple people comment, and Alessandro, there were some questions about your accent or the way you speak. So you want to share a little bit about your background? This is an audio podcast, so obviously nobody can try and guess who you are based off of how you look. So why don't you share a little bit about it?
Yeah. So that's something that I get asked all the time. They're like, "Where are you from?" It's not just my accent. I think it's just even. So I'm currently in Italy, serving in Italy, and even like the way, like because I grew up. So that's part of the story. I grew up in Italy. So I'm Filipino Italian. My mother's Filipina, and I was born in the Philippines, and then we quickly moved to Italy in Sicily, which is a, if you know Sicily, it has its own language. And so my dad was Sicilian, or is Sicilian, and my um, mother, as far as I remember, was speaking Italian in our house. And so this is a Filipina lady who had to learn Italian, and I could say proper Italian. And so here you have my dad, who's Sicilian, talking to us, my mother, who is speaking Italian, going to school where at that time Sicilian was not a pleasant thing to listen to. They consider it vulgar, or at least not allowed in school. So like having those dynamics. And then when I was 9 years old, moving to America. So to New Jersey, where it has its own little subculture and how they speak. And so very interesting. And so picking up all those things, kind of, I have my own cadence, my own way of saying things. And even when I speak Italian, I'm not like most people who had to learn the language because I already knew it. I just kind of wasn't using it. And coming back to Italy, I picked it up. So I speak as if I'm fluent, but then my vocabulary and the level of things that I get wrong, just people are so confused by who I am. They're like, "Who are you?" And I'm confused.
I can relate
How many
too.
passports do you have, Alessandro?
I have two.
Okay.
I am trying to go for a third. I am technically allowed to have my Filipino passport, and so I'm trying to work that out, and so I'm hoping to have all three.
Man,
That's awesome.
I always joke with like interns or short term people. I was like, being a missionary is kind of like being like a secret agent in the CIA or something. And now you're talking about multiple passports. I'm just envisioning like Jason Bourne or something pulling out, what passport do I need for this country? You can shuffle your 3 passports. That's funny. So thank you for sharing. And yeah, hopefully as we go on and as these seasons go into many, many seasons of this podcast, we'll get to know each other all a little bit better. But we want to go back and jump into the same argument that we were talking about last time, which is the idea of doing missions with. We looked at Luke 14, and we talked about the different responsibilities of a missionary who's arriving, and of the host or the country receiving those missionaries, and just kind of how to work together to be in the best um, position for honoring the culture you're stepping into, but also for the culture to honor your gifts and your calling. And so that was really cool. But let's go another layer into that and talk a little bit about why this idea of doing with matters. What's important behind doing with. And Jen, do you want to step in for those of you who maybe you didn't catch the first episode? Our first season is actually outlined based off of Jen's dissertation, and so we're going ahead and kind of working through her dissertation as part of our topics.
Yeah. Yeah. So missions with the idea came, we based it in Luke 14, like we talked about in our pilot episode. And it's this idea that, I don't think we are supposed to be doing missions to others or missions for others, but missions with others, missions with the culture um, to which God has called us. And there's a few reasons why I think that matters. First and foremost, as we said last time, how we do missions as part of the mission work, how we go about it is as important as the work itself. And sometimes we can forget that my way of doing something is part of the something. One of the things that I think Missions With does is it acknowledges that God is already at work and active and present in the cultures to which we're called. Um, for those of us in Europe, we know that there's a long history of God's work in these places. And while, people say Italy is the graveyard of missionaries or France is the graveyard of missionaries, I've heard it for every country, actually, that phrase. Um, the reality is there's a long history. There were martyrs here in Lyon, where I live, in 177 AD. There were martyrs, people who were killed for their faith in those early centuries. And so there's a presence and activity of God. We see it in the big cathedrals all around us, that there was a reverence for God. We see it in the cultures, which many have likened right now to, most Western cultures that have their roots in Christianity can be likened to vases of cut flowers. That is to say, we're still benefiting from the beauty that comes out of the truth of the gospel, that humans have value, that they're created in the image of God. All of human rights are based in that concept. And Western cultures are still often flourishing like beautiful flowers that you have in a cut vase. But they've cut off the roots. They're no longer acknowledging that God is the source and the reason for that beauty. But they're still benefiting from it. Nevertheless, God has been active and present in the places that we are. And there's a remnant of people. While the majority of the culture may not be churchgoers or people of faith or what we would call practicing, whether Catholic or Christian, um, there is a remnant. There is some activity there. And so sometimes I think missionaries can show up without taking the time to acknowledge that God has already gone before us into many of these places. And it's sort of like, I don't know if you've ever known someone who, walks into a room and all of a sudden starts a conversation when maybe there was already a conversation going on. Maybe there was already something important being discussed, and that person just came in with their own agenda and started. And I think sometimes we can arrive that way. We just come in and here's the conversation and here's how we're going to have it without taking the time to first listen and see where God's at work.
That's good and interesting. When you're saying that, what I'm thinking of is like, missionaries tend to be like type A kind of maverick style people, or at least traditionally. And so,
Pioneers.
yeah. And like, so then at least, and I kind of see that in myself a little bit too. Like, and so, yeah, I think I've probably done that too. Like if I go somewhere and it's a little too quiet, then I kind of come in and start conversation and and I think it's a little bit out of awkwardness. Like I feel like there's some awkwardness to the quietness, but um, as you're saying that, Jen, one of the things I was thinking is you were talking a lot about Europe or historical kind of presence of Christianity here, but I'm thinking even our theology around God's omnipresence should give us an idea that even in the
Exactly.
countries where there's no God, quote unquote, or no Christianity, we should expect God to be at work even there,
I
even those that
agree.
are going to places where the church has not yet gone.
I agree. I don't have experience with unreached people groups, but I would assert that we still have to acknowledge that God is omnipresent, that He's doing something there. And it would behoove us to discover, even if it's just through finding the people of peace, as we often talk about in missions, to still discover where God is at work.
Yeah, I always like to look at the other side of the coin. So I'm in agreement in the sense that I do think that, in fact, I do that all the time at the church that I pastor in Italy, where I always say we're not going to do anything unless we hop on in what God is already doing. We have all these ideas, and we're not going to jump on and start something new because we want to be where God is active, where He's working. But the other side of the coin is um, those who do want to listen, those who do come with the right heart, those who come in the room and like trying to figure out what the conversation is, but then you don't really hear anything really tangible or that makes sense. And I think I've experienced that. I don't know, both Jen or Jesse, if like I've tried to figure out what the story is here in Italy, and I honestly find that I still can't piece it together. I've been here 5 years, and I'm shocked how there are missionaries who've been here for 20, 25 years, or churches that are from here, are native churches and local churches, and they don't know the full story. And so, in a way, I feel like we're all falling short somewhere, where we just are not good at putting this tapestry of God's work together. We just are happy to write our story, to write the story that we're working in, not realizing. I wonder how that fits in with what Jesse's doing, with what Jen is doing, and what with the people in the States are doing. And so I
Yeah.
think it's just it's a mess out there. And even if we try to be good listeners, we find it that it's difficult work to figure out what God is doing in the sense of the today historical piece, because we could go and read the bigger pieces, right? The Reformation and just what took place and all that stuff. But what about the little things? Like I'm trying to figure out the Christian history uh, in Cisterna, where I'm pastoring, and I can't find any books on it. I can't find any voices
Mm.
on it.
I mean, I think it's great that you're trying though, and that you're looking. One of the things I did with my master's is when I had to write papers on church history, I wrote them on like the martyrs of Lyon. I wrote them on, Christians who were at work in France, just to help me understand and discover those things. And I agree, it can be really tricky on the local level, and I think that's one thing that we can do is kind of call people together to listen. Not necessarily just to launch projects right away, but to listen and to hear, what are you doing and how is it going and where are you seeing God moving locally? I also know that one thing that's helped me is connecting with broader networks. So things like Lausanne networks, which are global, or evangelical alliances. Many countries, I don't know about Italy, but many countries in Europe have active evangelical alliances. And then there's the European Evangelical Alliance. And connecting with the different networks there also helps me not only get to know some of the key players, but helps me to discern some of the broad strokes of the movements of God in this place at this time. So I agree, Alessandro. It's hard. It's sometimes sometimes it's like being on a treasure hunt. We know God's at work, but we have to discover it and we have to dig for it. We have to, really investigate and look around. And sometimes, yeah, sometimes we might discover voids and gaps, and that's okay. That helps us know too where God might be inviting us to participate or make a contribution.
I think too the other part of it is this idea is we talked about it a little bit in the pilot episode. This idea that maybe the host country or culture isn't prepared even to, maybe they aren't having the conversation. So maybe you're trying to listen, and
Right.
it really is just silence because
Right.
they've never been encouraged or empowered to do that. Or
Exactly.
um, recently I had this situation on the rugby team, and I was kind of complaining a little bit because I was like, there's just a lack of organization and pre-planning, and we could, if we thought a little bit ahead, we could plan and have, a better idea together. And the coach looked at me and he's like, we're Italian. That's not our way. This isn't how we do things. And I was like I didn't know what to do with it in that moment, but I just like I've been sitting with that because it's like, okay, it's just a difference. And I think that idea of when we come, going off of the parable, and we wait for the host to move us up to the different spots, or for the host to take the driver's seat. um, I wonder if it's a little bit like, when a teenager is learning to drive and the parent is like, this sounds bad because then we're putting the parent in some sort of superior role, but that's not what I'm trying to say. Like when the teenager's driving and they're not used to driving, then they're learning, they're making mistakes, they're trying to figure it out. And Um, yeah, I don't know. This probably isn't the right podcast episode to talk about that in depth, but it would be good to talk about that at some point.
Well, I think you're getting at something that is another reason why I think missions with matters, Jesse. I think you're leaning into it. It's a concept that I like to call the necessary stranger. So, this idea of a necessary stranger is, well, the classic one is, for example, there's all the anecdotes or the TV shows or the movies or the books that have sort of a bartender who's, pouring the drinks. And while he's pouring the drinks, the people on the other side of the bar are pouring out their lives to this perfect stranger. They're telling this bartender stuff they would never tell their next door neighbor, probably haven't told their wife, and maybe nobody else knows about them because the person is sort of a safe, distant person. It's someone that, you know, you have no super deep relational connection with, and so you're not so worried about protecting your image or about maintaining a status or whatever, and you can just kind of unveil yourself. And or it happens a lot. I don't know about you guys, but as a pastor on a plane, man, if you tell someone you're a pastor on a plane, the person sitting next to you sometimes will tell you stuff that you think, I just did not know I was going to be having this conversation right now. That's another benefit of the noise canceling headphones, Jesse. But honestly, we can get to that, that necessary stranger. And I find that sometimes as the stranger in France, I have those sorts of experiences, whether it's with, experienced Christian leaders who already have some platform and recognition and momentum in their ministries, or whether it's with, the people I meet at the workshop where I go do pottery, who find out that I am a pastor and that I work in a church, and will start to ask me questions that, they wouldn't really ask a French person, that they wouldn't feel comfortable asking if they wouldn't dare to ask a French person. Some ways it's the same experience as when you have kids. You've been raising them in a Christian home, you've been telling them about Jesus every day, you've been praying with them every night, and then you send them to summer camp and then they come back and they've been saved because they've heard the gospel. And you're thinking, hey, kid, I've told you the gospel every day of your life. But somehow, when they're with this necessary stranger, with this outsider, something opens up and they hear with fresh ears. They hear differently. And I believe this is one of the reasons God ordained missions, and specifically cross-cultural missions. I think we need outsiders that say things in a way that we can hear them. I worked with a language helper to prepare all my sermons when I was first learning French. And one time she asked me, Jen, why do you want to speak French like a French person? And I said, because I thought French people wanted me to speak French like a French person. And she said, sometimes because you say something a little bit different and you don't use the cliche, I hear it for the first time. That's something a necessary stranger can bring to the equation. And that might look a little bit like what you were saying, Jesse, like sitting in the passenger seat with a student driver, where you don't have your hands on the wheels, but you're bringing something of value and importance that needs to happen in that place.
Yeah, to kind of add to this idea of the necessary stranger, not necessarily just having the opportunity to listen, but actually having the opportunity to then gather all these thoughts and put them together. To kind of go off a little bit of what I was saying, the lack of story being put together. I'm just reminded how, again, we said this in the first episode where Jesse and I are in proximity. He's in Rome, I'm in Chester, and we're near each other, about a 30-minute train ride, 1 hour drive, and he happened to have some guest missionaries or people coming from the states, and he set up these kind of meetings where they were asking questions to the locals, and I ended up doing the same thing. We both didn't know about this, but we talked about it, and we kind of talked about how that was super helpful. But something we never did, just is we never put together those thoughts. So then nobody has to do that again, right? Like, or not that they never have to do it again, but they can be like, oh, we actually have a list of things that you can easily read before you have somebody come over to ask those questions. And sometimes I feel like a lot of people are coming over and having these meetings, and no one's recording them. I learned so much. I've been here 5 years, and having these two missionary guests come and wanting me to set up meetings, and they asked those questions that I wasn't even, maybe I was thinking, but I never asked. Um, and I learned so much. Just I was like, I'm learning so much. It's not even for them; it's for me.
Right. But they
Right.
came as an outsider with
So,
those questions, right?
hmm
I think it gives us platform sometimes too, even to be needy, to be the one to have to say, "Hey, I don't know." David and I are thinking about, buying our apartment, and I have to go to a meeting with someone today, and I've never had to navigate that before. So asking some people from my community and my church, "Hey, how do you, who do I need to talk to? What does that look like?" When we put ourselves in that position of need, um, it opens other people up too to being comfortable with their vulnerabilities and with their needs. So we can benefit actually from exposing our vulnerability as strangers and as people who are outsiders.
That's the part that isn't always easy for us from the West. Pick yourself up from your bootstraps and figure it out. And it's like, oh, independence. It's hard to say, oh, I need your help. Can you help me with this? Can you show me how to do this? Especially when probably if you were doing the same thing in your passport country, you'd be like, I know how to do this, but here you need some help, or whether it's language or just cultural differences and stuff.
Totally.
Yeah, just wanted to kind of go back to that first thing that we talked about, the idea that God is already at work. I wonder if there is the opposite of that, kind of realizing like to figure out where God is not working, in the sense that, kind of like when you say everything is everything, then it becomes nothing. And so, how do you then to kind of help us then identify, like today, we're in the mission field, and you kind of alluded or gave us some ideas, Jen, to kind of gather the locals. But what are some other thoughts that we have that could be like, this is how I identify that God's moving here, so then I could participate in it. And I know He's not moving there, and so we're not going to go there in that way. I just thought that I think it might be helpful to also see the.
Jesus said, if they don't receive you, then dust your sandals off and keep going. How do we identify that he's no longer working there?
Yeah, because you kind of mentioned too, Jesse, where we're kind of from the West, we kind of like, oh, there's a wall. That means I have to break it. Instead of trying to kind of say, oh, no, God put that wall.
Here's why I think God is so amazing. I think it is this constant question of discernment and staying close to the Father, staying close to the Father's heart. This is where it comes back to, if I am not tending to my own soul, if I am not tending to my relationship with God, to my intimacy with Christ, I'm going to have so much trouble discerning that. Where is He moving? Where is the Spirit moving? How is the Spirit moving? So, my first thing, which sounds so obvious, but I don't know if you guys have this experience where once you get into ministry, sometimes it can be the only time you're reading your Bible is to prepare a sermon, or the only time you're praying is with someone who comes to you with a need of theirs, not for your needs, not for your own brokenness. The only time, we're confessing is maybe never, because we just haven't built that into our rhythms, our habits, and we're not taking stock of how our day went. And I think the number one thing we have to do um, and focus on is continually developing that intimacy with Christ and being transformed into the image of Christ. And I think we talked in the pilot episode about, these three things that contribute to missionary effectiveness and sustainability, being Christ-like character, cultural intelligence, and ministry capacity. The first one is Christ-like character. And that doesn't happen on the stage. It doesn't happen out meeting with our friends and neighbors. It doesn't happen evangelizing. It doesn't happen serving the poor. It happens in those, daily habits that are not sexy, that are not seen, and that are essential to our own growth and development. And 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 so for me, that has to be job one. That has to be job one. After that, I think we, sometimes when there's a wall, it's because God is trying to redirect us and point us in a different direction. Sometimes there are walls we have to break down. So being able to discern that. I had someone who grew up as a missionary kid in Afghanistan tell me that their understanding, and this person was not American, this was a Dutch person, and it was worked on a multicultural team. And he said, the idea of American missionaries was when things got hard, it must mean that, God wasn't in it and they were supposed to go home. We don't have a good theology of suffering. And sometimes there are walls that we're called to break down, and sometimes we're going to break our shoulder as we try to do it. And sometimes that's us being stubborn and trying to go in a way that God's not going. So again, if we don't go back to being able to discern what God is asking of us and move into that space. So that's why community is so important too, because we don't discern alone in a vacuum. We need a community of faith. We need others around us. We need prayer teams. We need prayer support. We need to be asking questions in community like, is God leading us here? Is God asking this of us? Because it's rare that it would just be one person that would have this vision and this mission, and that's God. There's going to be resonance in the body of believers as God leads us together, and that brings us back to with.
It does indeed. That's good. And man, I feel like every time we record, there's other things that could go from that. Like I think we could have a whole season probably on just missionaries taking care of their own souls and being connected with God and hearing from Him as part of that discernment process. I recently had to kind of decide to put an end to a chapter of ministry and move forward. And yeah, it's hard. It's hard to do that. It's hard to say, and I think the hardest part is you're dealing with people. And so, that's what's hard, especially when I think of evangelism. Like, you might be evangelizing and sharing the gospel with someone for so long, and then you kind of realize, like, okay, this is not connecting, and you kind of move on to other things. And yeah, it's hard because there's a relationship, there's people involved, and this has been great. Just want to give an opportunity if there's any concluding thoughts, anybody wants to jump in and share any kind of last thoughts on this idea of with. And obviously we're going to explore more of this as we go on through the episodes, but anybody want to conclude why with matters?
I just want to comment as a concluding statement from my part in what Jen said. Just I appreciate you kind of saying what needs to happen is what every Christian needs to do, right? To have this intimate relationship with the Lord and continue it. And I think it's necessary that you say that, and I'm glad you said it because sometimes it's sort of like the cheesy answer, like, oh, you just have to read the Bible. Yeah, but it is what you need to do. And so I think it's all the more important to hear that when you're in missions at times, because of all the other priorities, and there really are a lot that we can forget that's what we need to do first. And so I really appreciate mentioning that, because I think that with matters when we're all walking in line with the Lord, or else we're all not walking together. We just happen to be walking in the same direction, but we're not together.
I'm preaching to myself too, Alessandro.
This was an enjoyable conversation. We want to thank you all for listening, and we want to encourage you to go ahead and share this on whatever platforms you're listening to it to. Share it with friends, colleagues, and we'll look for you. We won't see you, I guess, but we hope to have your likes and your comments on the next